that is a foundational worry, but stepping a little bit away from our current reality, our current paradigm, and all of the worries, frustrations, and foibles of our day-to-day lives. And with someone such as yourself in a field that saves lives, a little break is a good thing. Rest and recuperation is a great thing.
It is. And that's why I am always looking forward to Wednesday.
I'm glad to see that I'm not the only one. I may have to, we may have to settle this the old-fashioned way with, a game of rock, paper, scissors for the number one fan or who enjoys it the most. But for right now, the fact that we all enjoy our Wednesdays, and in my case, often look forward to Wednesdays as a reprieve, I am very, very happy with that.
I'll drink a glass of blood to that.
Now, I've wanted to do an interview with our characters and get their mindsets and the players as well. But in the spirit of transparency, one of the many things that I do as a storyteller to help immerse everyone into the game and try to help build that rapport with the characters is, as you notice on the server, everyone's username is their character's name. When I address everyone, it's always in character. I always say, hey, Lucio, hey, Alexander, hey, Clyde, to help get us all in the mindset of our characters. But for the record, I am not Nobody. Well, I am Mr. Nobody, but my name is Jerome. Yours?
My name is Eric.
Hi, Eric. It's nice to meet you. I've met Lucio, and I'm very, very fond of Lucio.
As am I.
So, I know that it was kind of a rushed affair getting everyone together, and we started with such a potentially negative auspice with the very first episode being, our very first session being interrupted by the need for medical assistance. I'm glad that you and all of our other players stuck around. But what was one of the things that made Lucio interesting to you to start with, to explore?
So I originally created Lucio based off of, and I think I might have told you this when I originally first joined the game, but it was very much based off of Jonathan Reed from the Vampire game.
Mm-hmm.
And really that game was kind of what got me into the idea of trying out Vampire the Masquerade, because I heard that this game was basically VTM in everything but name. But I found the character to be very interesting, mainly because he was someone newly embraced, trying to figure out his place in this new all-night society. And that's exactly why Lucio is also a similar character, freshly embraced, trying to navigate the dangers and politics of the Kindred world. I wanted to explore that, but also take it from a different perspective. So while Jonathan Reed was a physician, I decided instead of being a physician, we could go along a different path as an investigator, someone who dug too deep into the secrets of, or the truth of the world, and came out changed.
I really enjoyed that aspect. I grew up reading lots of pulpy late 70s, early 80s, a lot of Arthur Conan Doyle, a lot of Arsène Lupin, and a lot of the older investigators, a lot of the older private eyes and ex-cons, and all of the people who just had lots of questions and were, the prototype, Sherlock was very adept at solving things. The hard-boiled, pulpy detectives always spoke to me a little bit more, even though Sherlock's my favorite, but they always spoke to me a little bit more because they got dirty. They got into the feel and ebb and flow of their lives, the world that they inhabited. Lots of crooks, lots of femme fatales, lots of just... It was exciting in its normality, basically. So you got a chance to get a slice of life and how these people thought or had honor codes. And that was one of the things that greatly appealed to me about Lucio. For instance, the idea of him being an investigator, someone who got too close to the fire. But having that understanding as Lucio's base, is there his growth over the last few seasons from that person who has tried to steer away from that natural impulse to investigate to someone who's diving both feet forward into all the deeper, darker reaches. He's the one person who's reached out to for Sapulas. He's the one person that got involved with Blue willingly. How did that change come about?
So a lot of factors, both in-game and out-of-game, kind of influenced this decision. Out-of-game, it was partly because I wanted to be able to explore some of the other aspects of the world of darkness, that purely being someone who was, for lack of a better term, disgusted by vampire society wouldn't really be able to explore. I am a new player to this game. This is my first Chronicle. And so being so heavily limited, I felt would have not allowed me to experience all that Vampire had to offer. In character, a lot of Lucio's decisions were based off of important needs at the moment, as well as a creeping realization that this is what he will be from now until eternity. There is no going back. As I explained, I believe only Hestia now is around who actually knows this explanation. But Lucio's decision to abstain from feeding off of other people, whether they're kindred or human, was born of a belief that maybe if he held out just long enough, he would have a second chance to go back to being human. But as he's learned more about the world, as he's learned of these elder vampires who have been around for literally hundreds, if not thousands of years, and are still vampires and have not gone back to being human, he's come to realize that he's going to be stuck like this, and if he wants to survive, he's going to have to make the best of it.
That's a fairly well thought out process, and it really gives an idea as to how Lucio thinks. And that's one of the other things I would like to ask you. How do you square yourself to think and act more in Lucio terms versus your own ideas? Like, how do you get into character?
Sometimes it's actually a little difficult for me to completely separate my personality from the character, just because sometimes, I wouldn't say I'm a professional actor by any stretch of the imagination. So I would definitely say that sometimes my own personality bleeds into Lucio's, but what I try to do in order to make sure that Lucio's decisions make sense in character is to always think first of what would someone in his situation with his history and his mindset do in this exact moment. What is their thoughts in this exact moment? So, for example, the incidents with Laura Blakeney outside the Succubus Club, that moment was born out of a belief that someone like Lucio, who is deeply protective of his family and friends, seeing the monster who killed him literally right across the street from them, would have triggered something in him, a sort of protective instinct that would lead to what might have been one of the most chaotic and deadly moments in the campaign, or in the Chronicle.
Yeah, you guys did a considerable. I was trying to exemplify how tense it was, but also how easily boring it could be trying to pursue someone. Because when you're chasing someone, it gets really hectic, especially if it's drawn out over several miles, as that actually almost was. How easy it was to get caught up in tunnel vision, as it were, ignoring the cars, ignoring the people, and to get that aspect of it. Because most times when you see chase situations, you have the action of it. What takes 15 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes is cut down to a couple of seconds. I wanted to try to drive home that, yeah, there's more things afoot and things are happening, but it can be very, very, unfortunately, boring. And you guys managed to ratchet things up.
I will say it definitely didn't feel boring. That was, I think, one of my absolute favorite sessions that we've had so far.
It's always a good thing. Well, in comparison, one of the larger scenes, which I used to spin off to our Dalton portion of our chronicle, how did Lucio perceive the Dalton disco from not being there and watching it all happen without it really happening? How do you think he perceived things?
Just to make sure I'm remembering the correct moment, that was the Lupine and Genghis shooting everyone day. Okay. I'll be honest, I don't quite remember why we were there. So the moment felt like a very chaotic and deadly situation. If I remember correctly, it had something to do with, or maybe that was a different moment, with one of Cameron's cases, or was that something else? Can you remind me?
Yes. You all initially went to the disco as a way to, through Hestia's backdoor friendship with Urzuli, to square things off with Newberry so that the permission didn't have anything to hold over your heads, and so that you all were as square as you could be with the permission who wanted to eat your hearts.
In that case, that failed spectacularly.
Yes. Well, yes and no. You all had a small moment. Clyde, in that particular episode, showed that as vicious as he could be, the monster that he acted as. He ran from the combat. He sought escape versus attacking. He showed how much people he cared mattered versus everyone else. And you all were involved with the more physical aspects. It was it was supposed to be chaotic, but a lot of things, a lot of subtle character moments came forward. For instance, Lucio was willing to attempt to figure out what was going on before acting. Hestia was showing her frustration and just how far she had slid from that first episode, being solely focused on helping. Simone had was losing himself to his beast, so he wasn't really quite himself. And one of the reasons why I look at the Dalton Disco as a big moment, because that's where Alexander ended up joining the coterie initially just to help. He showed off his drive toward heroism, and that's also the backstory for how Dizzy ended up meeting up with the coterie. Speaking of which, Dizzy, how we doing?
Hey, what's up? I'm just lurking. Don't mind me.
Well, for introduction's sake, we're doing a small little interview with Lucio in terms of how he came to be and all of the things that we spoke about briefly via post. I wanted to try and get that out there so that we could have a recorded session of that. But being as you are here in a very timely fashion, for the record, I'm Jerome. Lucio is actually
Eric. And
Dizzy is actually
Jay.
That makes 2 J's so far. Jerome, Jay. All right, so one of the things that I talked about was earlier, which you may not have caught, was the reason why I call everyone by their character's name. A mnemonic trick to try to bring forward more immersion in the character and how the character thinks and how they perceive things so that we can easily slip into the character. We got how Lucio comes into being. How do you step into Dizzy's mindset?
Well, it's a bit of a process for me. I kind of, it seems weird, but I bring up her picture on my computer and I kind of just stare at it for a while and close my eyes and try to imagine being, a 19-year-old emo girl, which, being a 50-year-old white guy is kind of weird, but, it is a problem.
Okay. Now we've got Lucio's most top all-time moment, which was the chase to corral Laura Blakeney. Would you concur that's one of your most favorite, or do you have a different moment that sticks out?
If I'd have shot her, that probably would have been the moment. But I don't know.
Yeah,
I think
sorry about that.
Oh, it's fine. No, she's way more useful alive. I didn't know how much that was going to tie into Dizzy's story either. But I don't think we've seen Dizzy's moment yet.
Okay. And a quick question to both of you guys in regards to the ebb and flow of the Chronicle has been a lot of ups, a lot of downs, and a lot of tension and consequences of choices. Is there any social moment with the NPCs or with the world at large that stands out that was defining in terms of either the coterie being an actual coterie or one of those things that it was a no moment that made you back away from the idea that they are actually a coterie?
I think maybe two moments come to mind. The first is, both of them are about Lucio viewing the coterie as a coterie. It still has to do with the same session, and it was essentially the call to arms, where Lucio basically says to everyone, please come help, and they all actually do come help him instead of asking, all right, what's in it for me? Or I'm not helping you fight some 300-year-old vampire. Go get yourself killed. Don't drag me into it. I think that was a moment where he realized, like, this wasn't just a bunch of people out for themselves. There was actually some sort of emotional connection between them. And I think another moment is also just some of those times where Lucio and really anyone was able to just sit down and kind of just reflect on what's been going on. Like, one of the most recent ones that I remember is when he was speaking with Alex and they kind of just had a heart-to-heart about their time as kindred and realizing how inexperienced they both are.
That is interesting. Yeah, that I come to think of it. Both Lucio and Alex are under a decade old. In Lucio's case, he's under a year old, and in Alex's case, he's under 5. That is, I don't think that happens too often where it's such a wide swath of ages. Because Dizzy is what, roughly 20 years, 15?
12. Yeah, she's been dead for 12 years now.
Aha. Still relatively new, but with the wealth of experiences that she's had on the road, it shows the difference in how much that experience actually matters. She's lived that life, that, get away, outlast, out-survive. Whereas Lucio's coming into the full weight of the maelstrom and the chaos of an organized, a relatively organized city, a stratified city, not necessarily organized.
One that's on the brink of a sect war, no less.
Yes. Speaking of which, having read the material, the official releases, and having any history with White Wolf and the Masquerade, what's your take on the quietude of the war that's actually still taking place in the city, instead of it being, vampires riding on the hood of cars, leaping off buildings or such? There are moments of explosive action, but for the most part, it's relatively quiet.
So I've only really read, not in its entirety, but like parts of the lore and the published material.
Mm-hmm.
But what I have read, I think it does fit in line very much with how vampires would be operating, especially in order to try and preserve their own identity or their own secrecy, I should say. Because as like we've been going through this campaign or this story, I've kind of like realized just how important the masquerade truly is for Kindred to continue existing. Especially with regards to how dangerous the Second Inquisition can actually be, and how ruthless they can be with being willing to firebomb one of their own buildings.
I was hoping that you guys would pick up on that zealotry and how even those who don't actively actually believe are a little more in line with the propaganda of the Second Inquisition as a whole, because there's several different agencies, several different middle companies, several different operations working in concert versus a single monolithic idea. That sheer paranoia that they're working with so many people and people who may not even realize they're working with them or were part of this movement. No, go right ahead.
I was going to say, I think in the setting, we've only seen the tip of the iceberg of how dangerous the Second Inquisition is, and definitely in this chronicle, because right now, I mean, it seems like right now it's mostly a Dizzy problem, but in very short order, I think it's going to be an everyone problem. You know, like they're looking specifically for her. She's dealing with people who are working specifically for them. And it's kind of just peripheral to the rest of the coterie, but I don't think that's going to last for a whole lot longer.
If I remember correctly, there was a moment, I think before you joined Dizzy, where one of our former members gave a police officer or some other public official their ID, which, if they had bothered to look it up, would have come up as a dead person. So it's probably going to become all of our problem much sooner than later.
Well, we already know that the van that we were worried about in the alley, that is the Inquisition.
Yes, and I'm trying not to spoil too much with exactly. Well, you know, I'm full trust, full honesty. That is part of the Second Inquisition. That is part of the FBI. That is part of the NSA, and that is part of the CIA. Because remember, it's not one monolithic entity. However, with them all using for-hire operators, their primary source of for-hire operators in the area, at least in the Chicagoland area, is Theist. They can occasionally get official equipment and use official vehicles from the motor pool, and occasionally get official, actual on-duty agents and officers. But for the most part, Theist uses former military, former agents, former state police, former sheriffs, former local police detectives, former police officers as middlemen, as the freelance hires for those goals.
Right. Plausible deniability on their part, right?
Mm-hmm. And many don't even realize exactly what they're there for. For instance, using Vivi, our most recent SPC that Dizzy is tied up with, is actually has so far been 100% honest with everything that she's shared, because that's all that she's been told. That's all that she's been hired for. Her skills coming into play because of natural consequence versus a targeted action. She's being used as an asset.
Yeah, I had assumed she'd been on the level because the blood is a wonderful thing.
Yes, even without her even realizing it. Alexander, how we doing, boss? I'm taking it the mute is strong with this one today. All right.
Push to talk is your friend.
I've never actually been able to get the push to talk to work for me.
No, I've been lazy. I've used the predominantly used the mute function on my actual headset versus any actual shortcuts or any actual keys in Discord.
I think it's a throwback from my MMO days because I'm screaming at people, "Don't stand on that! What's wrong with you?" Push to talk is a good thing.
All right. Well, it is just about 8 o'clock. It's usually our time where we start our soft start. So I'll end our interview portion right here. Give us a time to get more, well, in my case, get more drinks because I'm almost out, believe it or not. And we'll drop a line to Hestia and Clyde and see if they will be joining so we can get an early start. And then we'll dive right in with our epilogue. Thanks, guys, so far. And I will see you in roughly about a minute and a half. Nah, let's take a full 5 and I'll be right back, okay?
Cool.
Sounds good to me.
I have to go get ice. I'm out of ice down here in my little fridge. But I am back and composing a missive to our dear Hestia and Clyde and see if they will be able to make it sooner than our soft start. Well, sooner than our hard start of 8:30. For the record, this is our epilogue, the absolute end of our season 5, which has had its own measure of ups, downs, various twists and turns, lots of secrets passed and conversations. What is done with those will be the test, I suppose.
I just hope we're picking up where we left off last week because no one tries to hit me with a car and me go, that's cool. I'll go away now.
Well, road rage is a very real thing. It doesn't always just affect cars.
Yeah, well, the Brewhall temper is also a very real thing.
That it is. I must admit, as a naturally Brewha unbiased disapproval, Dizzy has been the first Brewha of her sort. Being perfectly honest, in the few years I've actually had of play, I've never had a Brewha go this long without at least several rage frenzies, and Dizzy has managed to stave that off on multiple occasions. I'm surprised.
She has a fair amount of dice for that sort of thing.
Did anyone tell our newer members of the coterie the story of how Lucio played whack-a-mole with a bunch of police officers?
Oh no, that did not actually. Our first remorse role in the game, and being perfectly honest, most of the characters purposely took steps to not ever have to worry about stains. But Lucio, in the act of protecting the coterie and protecting the haven, took a concrete, clogged and jammed piece of rebar and wielded it as if he was Thor against several police officers who happened to be near the haven. It was actually a really interesting moment. It was the most human and humane of the coterie taking a weapon of opportunity and wielding it as if it was a +3 sword or hammer, as the case was actually.
It was, I believe it was either our second or third session. And mind you, this was not a frenzy. Lucio chose to do this.
It was controlled chaos.
I mean, we are monsters. People forget that. It's not all happy, shiny, shiny.
That is true, but it also, I think, made me realize that Lucio has a penchant for going absolute overkill when dealing with any sort of perceived threat to people he cares about.
That has become a character trait for Lucio and Clyde, strangely enough. It's interesting how that willing to do everything and anything and deal with the consequences later.
I think from a narrative standpoint, the things the characters are willing to do while they're in full control of themselves is way more frightening than the stuff they do when the beast takes over.
So far, it definitely has been. All of the, not all of them, but a lot of the more graphic moments, a lot of the more simply monstrous moments have come at the end of a conscious decision.
I think every single stain that Lucio has accumulated so far has been because of a choice that he made that caused it.
I still have yet to see Alexander's dark side. I'm still kind of exploring him as a character, I think, and getting to know this world with him. But I'm sure it'll come up sooner or later.
Which is another thing I'm surprised. The greatest temptation for a Hakamite, and Alexander just skated right past it without any major effort on his part. It was literally Kindred Vitae coursing down his throat, and he
keeps doing it though. Like, he can't stop drinking vampire blood at this point. He had a taste of it. Now he's just like, any opportunity he gets, I'm gonna get that juice, you know.
It
seems fun on the surface, but there's a downside to that. Let me promise you.
Yeah. Maybe that'll be his thing, is he gets addicted to vampire blood.
Accidentally gets blood bound to Lucio.
I mean, he has bond resistance and short bond because I was worried about the Asimite clanbane. But he's not immune to blood bonds, is the thing, though. I never like to make a character who's immune to blood bonds, because there's a lot of dramatic opportunity with blood bonds.
There most assuredly is, but the dice gods and fate themselves seem to not wish to pull that trigger just yet.
Yeah.
Well, the early part of our session tonight has been a small impromptu interview with Lucio and Dizzy about some of the underlying gameplay aspects, such as some of the more glaring moments of that stand out, how we step into character. What are some of those things for Alexander? How do you step into Alexander's character? How does he speak to you?
I mostly see him as like a Batman-like character. He sees a great. He's not sure what it is, but he sees a greater purpose that is more important than his own life and well-being. But he has morals that he is very hard pressed to compromise. Even though he's so dedicated to his objective, he wants to make sure he does it the right way, even if it costs him his life in the process. And I have been fully prepared for like situations where, okay, Alexander might die here, because I think Alexander would be prepared for that too. He'd be content dying in a situation where he can't succeed, because even though I do kind of use the idea of Batman to get into the character of him, he, with his rough situations he encountered in life, kind of made him understand that Batman is just a fairy tale. He's not real. People die in real life, you know, and he understands that and he accepts that.
That's interesting. That's similar to how our recently dispatched Simone had viewed himself as if there was a noble cause, and he was but in his case it was some semblance of atonement.
I think there's a degree of that for Alex as well, because he wasn't exactly the best person in life. He wasn't a totally bad person. He definitely sees himself as worse. Like, after he became a vampire, he definitely became a worse person, but I think he is trying to atone for some of that, since he doesn't have the same struggles that he did in his mortal life. He has a different set of struggles now, and he's trying not to let those compromise him as much as his struggles in life did. Because he was, even though he was very loosely Buddhist, and his belief system involved not stealing and not doing things wrong that could lead to the suffering of yourself or others, he still was a thief. Like he stole at night. It was the thing he did. It's how he got a lot of his money, because being a martial arts instructor didn't really pay all the bills. So he did bad stuff, and he understands that it was wrong. And I think now he's trying to be better, fighting crime instead of going out and committing crimes, with obvious exceptions, of course. He's definitely not beholden to the actual law in any way. I think he has his own idea of the rules that people should follow.
It's kind of funny the way that it's worked out. As one of the many things that I had considered was just based on basic archetype of the characters. Instead of it being Soup City Sins, it just being the outsiders. Because every character so far has a penchant for independence, a penchant for skewed lines of thought. Each has their own honor code or moral guidelines, but each has their own drives that put them at not at a complete cross purposes, but at a loggerhead with most of the established Kindred society. There's lots of independence. But taking a quick look at our